When 16-year-old Alex Thompson stepped onto the Family Feud stage with quiet confidence and a rainbow pin on his jacket, he carried himself with the dignity of someone who had learned that the hardest battles are fought not against external enemies but against the world's insistence that you should be someone other than who you know yourself to be. But when he answered being who you really are when the world says you're wrong to a question about what takes the most courage, he began sharing a story that would remind everyone watching that authentic living requires the kind of bravery most people never have to summon, and that family love can transform society's rejection into unshakable strength. Alex walked with the careful composure of someone who had faced more judgment and scrutiny in his 16 years than most adults encounter in a lifetime, yet who had emerged with his sense of self, not just intact but strengthened by the process of defending his identity against those who would deny its validity. There was something immediately compelling about his presence, not because his story was unique, but because he radiated the kind of centered authenticity that comes from surviving the process of becoming who you truly are despite the world's resistance. The Thompson family had made the journey from Portland, Oregon, with a unity forged through 2 years of learning, growing and standing together against societal pressures that sought to divide them. There was Jennifer Thompson, 45, Alex's mother, a high school English teacher who had spent countless hours educating herself about transgender identity after Alex came out, transforming from uncertainty to fierce advocacy through her love for her child. His father, Michael, 48, a construction worker who had struggled initially with understanding Alex's transition, but had chosen education over prejudice, attending support groups, and reading everything he could find about how to support transgender youth. Alex's younger sister, Maya, 14, who had become one of his strongest allies and advocates, defending him at school and helping educate their extended family about transgender issues. The family was joined by Dr. Sarah Martinez, 52, Alex's therapist who specialized in working with transgender adolescents and their families, helping them navigate the complex medical, social, and emotional aspects of transition, and Rebecca Johnson, 38, the LGBTQ pause coordinator at Alex's high school, who had worked to create safe spaces and anti-bullying policies that protected students like Alex. But it was Alex himself who commanded attention, not because he was transgender, but because he possessed the kind of moral courage and clarity of purpose that inspired others to question their own assumptions about identity, acceptance, and what it means to live authentically in a world that often demands conformity. Alex's journey of self-discovery had begun earlier than most people realized. Even as a young child, he had felt a persistent disconnect between the gender he was assigned at birth and his internal sense of self. For years he had tried to conform to others' expectations, wearing clothes that felt wrong, accepting pronouns that didn't fit, participating in activities that felt like performances rather than expressions of his true nature. The turning point had come when Alex was 14, during a particularly difficult period, when the onset of puberty had intensified his feelings of body dysphoria and social disconnection. He had been struggling with depression and anxiety, feeling increasingly isolated from family and friends who saw him as someone he knew he wasn't. The conversation with his parents had been one of the most difficult of his young life. Alex had spent weeks preparing, researching, finding resources that could help them understand what he was experiencing. When he finally found the courage to tell them that he was transgender, that he identified as male despite being assigned female at birth, their initial response had been a mixture of surprise, concern, and the kind of protective love that seeks to understand rather than dismiss. The months that followed had been a period of intensive education and adjustment for the entire family. Jennifer and Michael had attended support groups for parents of transgender children, had consulted with medical professionals who specialized in adolescent gender dysphoria, and had worked with therapists to understand how to best support Alex's well-being and development. The decision to begin social transition had been made carefully, with extensive counseling and medical consultation. Alex had started using male pronouns, had chosen a name that reflected his identity, and had begun dressing in ways that felt authentic to his sense of self. The relief he felt at being able to live openly as who he knew himself to be had been transformative. His depression had lifted, his anxiety had decreased, and his confidence had grown steadily. But social transition had also brought new challenges. At school, Alex had faced bullying from students who didn't understand or accept transgender identity. Some teachers had struggled with using his correct name and pronouns. Parents of other students had complained about his presence in male spaces, creating ongoing tension and requiring constant advocacy from his family and school administrators. The beginning of medical transition had been another significant milestone. After extensive consultation with endocrinologists and mental health professionals, Alex had begun hormone therapy that would help his physical development align with his gender identity. The changes had been gradual but meaningful. His voice had begun to deepen, his body composition had started to shift, and he had felt increasing congruence between his internal sense of self and his physical appearance. Throughout this process, Alex had found purpose in helping other transgender youth who were earlier in their journeys. He had become a peer mentor through local LGBTQ organizations, sharing his experience with families who were struggling to understand and support their transgender children. He had spoken at school board meetings about the importance of inclusive policies and at community events about the realities of transgender youth experience. The decision to apply for Family Feud had been Maya's suggestion, born from her belief that positive representation of transgender youth and supportive families could help change hearts and minds across the country. Alex had been nervous about the visibility. Being transgender on national television felt potentially dangerous in a political climate where transgender rights were constantly under attack. But his family had convinced him that sharing their story could help other families understand that transgender identity wasn't something to be feared or rejected, but something to be understood and supported with love, education, and proper medical care. Steve Harvey had been briefed about Alex's background during rehearsal, but meeting the Thompson family in person revealed layers of strength, unity, and genuine love that couldn't be captured in a production note. There was something immediately impressive about Alex's presence, not because he was brave for being transgender, but because he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had fought for the right to be authentic and had won that fight through persistence, education, and family support. Alex, Steve had said during the family introductions, speaking with the respect due to any young person who had shown remarkable maturity, tell us about yourself. What are you passionate about? I'm passionate about helping other LGBTQ+ youth feel safe and supported, Alex had replied clearly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found his purpose through his own experience. I do peer mentoring and advocacy work because I know how important it is for young people to see that they can live authentically and have supportive families. That's incredible work for someone your age, Steve had said, genuinely impressed. What made you interested in advocacy? Personal experience, Alex had replied with a slight smile. I'm transgender, and I know what it's like to struggle with identity and to worry about acceptance. I want other kids to know that they can be who they really are, and that there are people who will support them. The game had progressed through 3 rounds with the Thompson family showing remarkable cohesion and obvious mutual support. Alex had contributed thoughtful answers, his responses revealing both wisdom beyond his years and the kind of social awareness that comes from navigating complex identity issues in a society that doesn't always understand or accept difference. When asked to name something that makes you strong, Alex had confidently answered, family support, earning the #1 spot on the board and warm applause from an audience that could see the genuine love among the Thompson family members. But it was during the 4th round that everything changed. The question touched the heart of human courage and authentic living. What takes the most courage? The competing family had just missed their opportunity to control the board, and it was the Thompson family's chance to steal. Jennifer had given the first answer, standing up for others, which had earned a solid spot on the board. Michael had followed with admitting you're wrong, another respectable response that reflected his own journey of growth and learning. Now it was Alex's turn. He stepped forward to the podium, and for a moment he was quiet, not uncertain, but gathering himself to express something that touched the core of his experience as a transgender teenager, the truth that had required more courage than anything else he had ever faced. When he spoke, His voice carried across the studio with a conviction that made everyone listen. Being who you really are when the world says you're wrong. The words hung in the air with a weight that seemed to silence the entire studio. The audience fell quiet, sensing that this wasn't just an abstract response, but a deeply personal truth shared by someone who had lived it in the most concrete way possible. Steve's expression changed immediately. The entertainer's smile, the quick wit, the practiced responses, all of it fell away as he processed what Alex had just said and began to understand the profound courage it represented. "Alex," Steve said softly, setting down his cards and approaching him. "That sounds like you're speaking from experience." Alex nodded, his confidence growing as he realized he had an opportunity to share something important with an audience much larger than the LGBTQ+ community where he usually discussed these insights. "I am," he replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through the challenge of defending his identity against societal pressure. "I'm transgender, which means I was assigned female at birth, but I'm actually male. For the first 14 years of my life, I tried to be who other people wanted me to be, but it was destroying me." Steve looked at this remarkable young man who was describing one of life's most fundamental challenges with the calm composure of someone who had not just survived, but had found strength in authenticity. "Alex," Steve said gently, "what was it like to tell your family who you really are?" Alex took a moment to consider how to explain the complexity of coming out as transgender to parents who had no previous experience with gender identity issues. "It was terrifying," he said honestly. "I was afraid they would reject me, that they would think I was confused or going through a phase, that they would try to change me back into someone I never really was." He looked at his parents, drawing strength from their obvious support and pride. "But I also knew that I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. Living as the wrong gender was making me depressed and anxious. I realized that I had to choose between being authentic and being safe, and I chose authenticity." Steve nodded, impressed by Alex's ability to articulate such a complex emotional and social challenge with such clarity and maturity. "And how did your family respond?" Steve asked. Alex's face lit up with obvious love and gratitude as he looked at his parents and sister. "They chose love over fear," he said simply. "They didn't understand everything at first, but they were willing to learn. They went to support groups. They talked to doctors. They educated themselves about transgender issues because they wanted to support me properly." The studio was completely quiet now, everyone understanding that they were hearing about family love in its most practical and transformative form. "They've been with me through every step of my transition, social, medical, legal. They've advocated for me at school. They've defended me to extended family members who didn't understand. They've made sure I have access to appropriate medical care." Steve realized he was looking at a family who had chosen education over ignorance, love over prejudice, and had demonstrated what authentic support for a transgender child actually looked like in practice. "Alex," Steve said, "what do you want people to understand about being transgender?" Alex straightened, revealing the advocate and educator who had emerged through his experience of living openly as transgender. "I want them to understand that being transgender isn't a choice or a phase or something that can be changed," he said with growing confidence. "It's who I am, just like being tall or having brown eyes. The choice is whether I'm allowed to live authentically or whether I have to pretend to be someone I'm not." The studio audience was leaning forward now, completely engaged with this young man's explanation of transgender identity and experience. "I also want people to know that transgender youth need support, not conversion therapy or attempts to change us. We need families who love us, schools that protect us, medical care that helps us, and communities that accept us for who we are." Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. "Alex," Steve said, "I want everyone in this studio to understand what we just heard. You're not just living authentically, you're teaching all of us what courage looks like when it's applied to the most basic question of human existence. Who am I allowed to be?" The audience began to react, not with political statements or cultural positions, but with genuine respect and recognition for a young person who had demonstrated remarkable bravery in the face of societal pressure to conform. But Steve wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something unexpected, a small rainbow pin that he had received from LGBTQ colleagues in the entertainment industry, a symbol of inclusion and acceptance that he had carried as a reminder of the diversity of human experience. Alex, Steve said, approaching him with the gravity of someone recognizing genuine courage. This pin represents something beautiful about human diversity, the understanding that we're all different, that those differences should be celebrated rather than feared, that authentic living requires courage, but creates beauty. He placed the pin gently in Alex's hands. But I want you to have it, because you've shown me that true courage isn't about fighting external battles, it's about refusing to fight the internal battle to be someone you're not. Alex accepted the pin with obvious emotion, understanding both the symbolic weight of the gesture and the recognition it represented. But I want to do something else, Steve continued. He began removing his suit jacket, the same navy blue jacket he wore for every taping. Alex, Steve said, draping the jacket carefully around the teenager's shoulders. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming who you always were. You're not changing your identity. You're finally living your identity openly and honestly. The jacket fit Alex well, and he wore it with the dignity of someone receiving recognition for authentic living and moral courage. This jacket has been with me for every show I've hosted this season, Steve continued, but today it belongs to someone who has taught me that the most important freedom we have is the freedom to be ourselves, and that the most important courage we can show is the courage to live authentically, even when authenticity comes with a cost. Alex looked down at the jacket, then at Steve, overwhelmed by the recognition and the validation that the gesture represented. Steve, he said, his voice thick with emotion, for 2 years I've worried that being transgender would always make me different, in ways that would limit my opportunities or my acceptance. You're the first person outside the LGBTQ+ community to suggest that being transgender might actually be a source of strength, rather than just a challenge. Steve looked at this extraordinary young man, who had transformed personal struggle into social advocacy, who had used his own experience to help other young people navigate similar challenges. Alex, Steve said, being transgender doesn't make you different in ways that matter. It makes you authentic in ways that inspire others. You haven't just found the courage to be yourself. You found the courage to help other people be themselves too. He turned to address the entire studio, including the millions of viewers who would watch this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Thompson represents something beautiful about human courage and family love. The power of authenticity to inspire others, the importance of supporting young people in becoming who they really are, the truth that our differences make us stronger when they're accepted with love and understanding. The audience erupted in sustained applause, but this time it felt more like recognition of genuine heroism than a game show moment, acknowledgement of courage that had been tested in real-world circumstances and had emerged victorious. As the camera stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something remarkable happened. Person after person approached Alex and his family, not to express political opinions or cultural positions, but to thank them for their courage, to share their own stories of supporting LGBTQ+ family members, to ask for advice about creating more inclusive communities. One elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. Alex, she said, my grandson came out as gay last year, and our family has been struggling to understand how to support him. Watching your family today, seeing the love and unity you've shown us what real family support looks like. 6 months later, the episode aired exactly as it happened, with resources provided for viewers seeking information about supporting LGBTQ+ youth. The response was immediate and largely positive, with families across the country reaching out to thank Alex for his courage in sharing his story. LGBTQ+ organizations reported increases in families seeking support and education about transgender issues. The episode became a training tool for schools and communities working to create more inclusive environments for LGBTQ. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from transgender youth and their families who saw in Alex's story proof that authentic living was possible, that family support could overcome societal pressure, that transgender identity could be a source of strength rather than just struggle. Alex returned to Portland with renewed confidence and expanded opportunities for advocacy. Steve's gesture had given him not just material recognition, but symbolic validation that his identity and his courage were valuable and worthy of celebration. He kept Steve's rainbow pin on his jacket as a daily reminder that diversity should be celebrated rather than feared. The jacket became the blazer he wore to speaking engagements, where he shared his story and advocated for LGBTQ+ rights and inclusion. The Thompson family became advocates for policy changes that protected transgender youth, working with schools and legislators to create environments where all students could learn safely and authentically. Their example inspired other families to choose education over fear when their own children came out as LGBT. Steve Harvey said in later interviews that meeting Alex changed his understanding of courage, authenticity, and what it means to support young people in becoming who they really are. He taught me that the greatest gift we can give our children isn't the freedom from challenges, Steve said. It's the support they need to face challenges with courage and authenticity. The lesson that day wasn't about transgender politics or cultural debates, though Alex had navigated both. It was about the truth that authentic living requires extraordinary courage, that family love can overcome societal pressure, and that young people who are supported in being themselves become advocates for others who are struggling with similar challenges. Alex Thompson proved that being transgender isn't about becoming someone different. It's about having the courage to live openly as who you've always been, despite a world that might prefer you to be someone else. He showed that the most profound courage isn't physical bravery but the emotional and social bravery required to be authentic when authenticity comes with risks. And Steve Harvey learned that sometimes the most powerful moments in television happen when you witness someone living their truth with such courage and clarity that it inspires everyone watching to examine their own relationship with authenticity, acceptance, and the courage required to support others in being exactly who they're meant to be.